Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, November 12th, 2015. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about homebrewing. This week, homebrewer CJ Shamas is back with the second half of our two-parter on brewing sour beers with small barrels. Steve Wilkes and Andy Sparks join me in the studio to sample some of CJ's work. If you're new to homebrewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And if you buy any of our DVD combos, you get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener, and check out the new lower pricing on our DVDs just in time for your holiday shopping. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. We're on the Google Plus as well. And thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us first and click on our associate link. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show. And we greatly appreciate your support, especially during this busy holiday season. It starts earlier every year. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own Magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support, and thanks to everybody who's done so already. Let's jump right into the mailbag for a couple of quick letters. James from Sacramento, California writes, just listened to the Mushroom Beer podcast, and I can't believe I didn't hear a mention of the candy cap mushroom. These are native to Northern California and give off an awesome maple aroma. Haven't brewed with them, but this episode inspired me. For those interested, they can be found in dried form online and tend to retain their pungent, earthy mapliness. Pungent, earthy mapliness. Appreciate that, James. That's, what is it, candy cap mushrooms? I think I've got that app on my iPhone. Cliff wrote in a YouTube comment under our Oktoberfest Basic Brewing video episode. Cliff says, so I actually have done a 100% Victory beer. It was a full volume boil, 5-gallon batch. The reason I did it was because I got a free 50-pound bag of Victory from my local brewery and decided to try it out. The result was a very low ABV, around 2% beer, that more or less tasted like cookies. Not bad, but not something you really want 5 gallons of. Luckily, my next batch was an 11% or so beer, forgot what kind, that had just a little too much alcohol kick to it. So, Cliff says, I ended up mixing the two, and the result was a beer unlike anything I've ever had. Great mouthfeel and head retention, solid ABV, and just enough residual sweetness and cookie flavor. Not a bad way to go if you ever find yourself in a position where you have an abundance of Victory malt. Excellent. I appreciate that, Cliff. I don't know if I'd describe my accidental, probably mostly Victory Oktoberfest as cookie-like, but yours does sound similar, so it's an awesome idea to use that as a blending beer. Hey, I'm getting stories for our annual disaster show. Send yours in. Steve and I will be recording that episode in a few weeks. Not sure yet when. I haven't scheduled it yet, so don't delay. Could be sooner than later. Who knows? It's finally cooling off in northwest Arkansas. We still have some time to brew some beers for the holidays. May I suggest something from our sponsors, Desiree and Dave from High Gravity in Tulsa. Every year they do a special holiday kit that they change up from season to season. This time, it's inspired by New Belgium's Frambozen. It's a brown ale with raspberries. There's also Ichabod Pumpkin Ale, inspired by Tulsa Brewing Company's Old Pumpkinhead. Tulsa Brewing is no longer in business, apparently, but this recipe is a frequent request from Tulsa customers who want to revive this beer every year. Or, if you want to skip the traditional holiday themes, you can go with Desiree's super fabulous tropical citrus IPA with West Coast IPA yeast. Now, this beer is brewed with nothing but late edition hops. So by adding all the hops in the last 15 minutes of the boil, the bitterness is smooth and not harsh. The in-your-face aromas of pineapple and grapefruit, the website says, puts an instant smile on your face and is backed up in the flavor. Wow, that does sound delicious. Check all those out at highgravitybrew.com. And for ingredients and many other products, get $7.99 flat rate shipping. That's all at highgravitybrew.com. It's been a while since Steve Wilkes, Andy Sparks of thehomebrewery.com, and I gathered together in the studio for a tasting. Scheduling is always a challenge, especially when we add the extra component of getting the brewer online as well. But we worked it out to taste some awesome sour beers from small barrels by CJ Shamas. Well, CJ Shamas, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
James, thanks for having me again.
And grunting in the background, clearing his throat, is Steve Wilkes.
I've got to lay off those Camels.
Switch to the menthols.
Picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
And Andy Sparks is in the house.
Yeah, it's always good to be on the show.
And we're going to talk about and sample sour beers, one of our favorite things. Mm-hmm. So CJ was on the show talking about brewing small barrel sour beers, and we promised that we would have him back on and actually sample some of the beers and talk about the processes. While you go over the fine points from the first time, Steve, I'm going to have you open this over the sink just for insurance purposes.
Awesome.
That blended saison is the first one, and we'll be pouring and enjoying that beer as we listen to you, CJ.
Great. Sit back because I like to talk.
My favorite kind of guest.
I had said the word experimentation a fair amount, and I don't know that necessarily helped the listeners on episode 1. So just to put a little bit of a finer point on it, essentially what I do is I only use 3 different types of grists for these barrel-aged sour beers, but with a variety of different yeasts and bacteria, methods of fermentation, different size barrels, types of barrels, fruit addition, and various blends. I produce a wide spectrum, a wide variety of barrel-aged sour beers. But if you really broke it down, you said, what are you making? The 3 beers are an American dark sour that I'll refer to as a Flemish red, a golden sour, which is essentially a lambic grist, 60% Pilsner, 40% wheat for the most part, and then like a sour saison that I'm trying to call it a tart farmhouse because I think that's really more accurately describes what the beer has become with time. So again, what I talk about is really just guidelines, and you need to listen to your barrels. Your barrels are going to talk to you, and they're going to talk to you through your beer. So let flavor produced by the barrel aging be the greatest factor for really determining your exact sequence. This is not a script. They're just guidelines. So last time I was like, hey, you got a whiskey barrel. Here's the first beer. You're going to put a big clean beer through it, an imperial stout. It sounds like you guys did something like that. That's awesome. It's a great beer for this particular kind of thing. You could certainly do a barley wine. And then I kind of alluded to the fact that you want to then move into the sours. And it doesn't need to be that next beer, but at some point the idea is you're going to turn these barrels sour. So I talked about something big and robust, that being a Flemish red. And then I just got so excited, I think, about talking about all the other things with barrels, I sort of missed what comes next. Well, what comes next is this concept that each subsequent beer that you put through, you're going to get less of that spirit character in your beer. And it's going to allow you to do different things, not that you necessarily need to. If you like the Flemish red, the dark sours, you could stay with that. But what I try to do at that point is as the barrel kind of ages in its process, I'm looking to kind of make something else out of the barrel. So at this point, I kind of lean towards what I would call that golden sour. I'm going to still keep the acidity high. I believe that is key at this point, because otherwise, if you drop the acidity too low too early in the process, the perception of the spirit and the wood is really going to jump. We're going to probably talk about that in our sampling today. And in general, as you continue to use your barrel, you can kind of lighten up the beer. You can start reducing the acidity as the spirit and the wood character becomes more neutral. I don't know that it ever really truly becomes neutral, but it will become more neutral. As this process occurs, fruit additions may not be necessary. Where earlier in the process, like that golden sour, it really takes fruit addition extremely well. Fruit tends to, I don't want to really say hide, but complements the wood and spirit character. So that's for the whiskey. And what you guys are sampling right now is a rum barrel, and typically the path that I'll take with the rum barrel, actually this particular rum barrel, the first beer I put in, was a clean Saison. It sounded great to me. A Saison with some rum, and it was not. It was sort of an unsuccessful attempt. What I would do in my next rum barrel is I would probably do something like a porter, because I kind of think a porter may take advantage of the tropical fruit tones produced by the rum barrel. So that would be my suggestion. And then what you can do is move into that golden sour domain. Again, keeping the acidity high. You might want to do a fruit addition. Stone fruits work really well for this kind of style. It took me 3 or 4 beers before I was ready to then, I want to say it was probably 3, before I really moved into this, the Saisons, the barrel-aged Saisons in the rum barrels. And a moderate level acidity in this works really well. And you don't want the acidity too high, because part of the whole idea with the Saison is you're going to get a lot of those yeast-driven flavors, and some of those esters play really well with those tropical tones of the rum barrel. So I think I just wanted to talk a little bit about recapping what we did the last time, but more or less filling in the blank. So what you guys are drinking right now, I believe the label was blended Saison, was it not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in my mind, I'm thinking of more of a tart farmhouse. And so you guys are drinking last year's, and I recently bottled this year's, and I have next year's already in the batch. So a little background of it. This beer, I believe, demonstrates blending in the bottle with a clean Saison yeast, which is a bit advanced, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for anything, for every type of style, but I do believe it works well here. And it also demonstrates the effective use of bottle dregs, and obviously a rum barrel-aged Saison. So my rum barrel-aged program at this point primarily produces these tart farmhouse Saisons. There's some tropical rum tones that I'm hoping play nicely, as I said, with the Saison's esters. And then what's happened is each year that each batch through, there's slight variations, but I continue to experiment with the style. You're drinking about 50% of it, so it's a blend, and it's a blend of 3. 50% is a clean Saison brewed with the Belle Saison. Approximately 25% is a golden sour that went through the barrel. And 25% of it was actually the first clean beer that I went through. I said it was an unsuccessful attempt at a clean Saison with some, rum character to it. I ended up bringing it to a family party, and everybody was just kind of like, yeah, this is great. I brought 3 gallons. I came home with 2 gallons of it. So it wasn't great. But what I did is I took a few gallons and I sort of experimented with it. There was an unsuccessful experiment. I would add a Brettanomyces, which actually I thought brought more of the booziness out of it, and that was a dump out. But there was a gallon there that was I added bottle dregs to, and it worked. It added a certain level of acidity that kind of did complement the booziness, but it was still rummy and oaky and kind of there. And that is also part. So you basically have 50% clean, 25% of a clean Saison first runnings that I did sour with bottle dregs, and 25% of a golden sour. So what do you guys think?
I think it's tasty. I think it's tart, but it's not overly sour, I would say. It's got a nice backbone to it. I am, frankly, not a big fan of rum, since that's a story that Rum and I had a long night one night. So, but it's not overpoweringly rummy to me, which is, in my opinion, is good. But yet I can detect it in there. I think I can get a little bit of the woody background, but again, it's not overpowering. I think it complements the style. I think it's It's crisp and refreshing. It's not as light as, say, a Berliner Weiss, but I think it's like a maybe an Imperial Berliner Weiss. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's nice. I find it quite tart. I pick up a lot of almost green apple and lemon in the flavor. And I love saisons. They're one of my very favorite. But I really like the yeast character, right? And for me, I would like more of that in here. I mean, just to balance it out. It's delicious, but I'd kind of like a little more of the yeast profile.
Steve?
I like. There's a wood. I get quite a bit of wood in it. And there's no joke there. Usually in the morning. But no, I can really pick up that this came out of a barrel. That's a very pronounced flavor to me. I agree with Andy that I get a lot of lemon. I didn't get the apple, but I do get the lemon. And I like the beer quite a bit, so I'm on my second glass.
What's the ABV on this, by the way, CJ?
I never describe the ABV until after you drink the beer completely. I'm just kidding. This is around 6%. I typically keep my sour beers somewhere between that 5 and 6% because we like drinking them so much that if there's too much alcohol, then you can only really have one. And this is even a style that this particular batch I want to say is pushing 6. It's really hard to quantify though with the rum and all the different blends that I had.
That's true.
But typically this style, I want it to be closer to a 5 to a 5.25% because I want to drink this when it's warm out. I want this to be a refreshing beer. And frankly, this beer that you guys are drinking is more what am I going to do? I have these 3 beers and I'm trying to make something out of kind of nothing. And it really spawned this whole barrel-aged saison. And Andy, I couldn't agree with you more. That is exactly the direction that this barrel program has gone, where I want much more of the yeast-driven flavors by the saison. And so I'm doing some things that we can talk about that I'm getting that in my next batches. So really what I'm shooting for is to be near the barn, but not in the barn. And I would say with what you guys are drinking, you might be in the same town as the barn, but I want to get a little closer. I want to taste some of those heavy yeast-driven flavors. I do actually want to taste a little Brettanomyces in it, but I don't want that to be the driving force. And the acidity needs to be right associated with these other flavors. These 3 different beers that I didn't brew to say they're going to go together, but with some sampling and some, hey, what am I going to do? I kind of turned it into something that has spawned an entire program for this particular barrel.
Well, why don't we rinse? We're down to the bottom of these. Luckily, we've got some beer left over, so why don't we rinse, and then we can move on to beer number 2, which is the Saison Solera. So why don't you start telling us about that, CJ?
Okay, so this is a collaboration beer with my brother James, who I spoke about before. And so the idea of a Solera is essentially that it's fractionally blended in such a way that the finished product is a mix of various ages, and there is a very complicated way that people do this, and we don't do that. What we have is a 15-gallon whiskey barrel that we share. It's a collaborative effort, and man, that thing is heavy when it's full. And the other thing is we have all these different beers going, and we make a lot of IPAs, and we make a lot of saisons and stouts and non-sour beers as well. So sometimes when you're just like, hey, we have 15 gallons of a sour beer, one barrel ready, it creates a bit of an issue for us. So what we decided is we were going to turn this into this Solera, modified Solera method, which it's this 15-gallon, and what we do is we remove 10 gallons at a time. And those 10 we play with, whether we're fruiting or whether we're straight bottling. This beer is actually the second beer that went through this barrel. The first beer was an Imperial Stout that we actually gave away as a holiday gift. Let's see, this was the second sour beer through. So it was really the third beer through. Okay. One thing that I do want you guys to just note as you drink this and then the next beer is just the oak spear character and your perception regarding that. This beer, we actually in this process we actually skipped the whole Flemish red step. We were at a point where we had so many Flemish reds in our program that we had bought a bunch of barrels at one time, and we're like, boy, we're going to do another barrel of the Flemish red. My God, we're going to have 50 gallons of Flemish red. So we said, let's skip it. Let's see what happens if we skip it. And so what you guys will be drinking is essentially that. So it's this. It kind of got away from our guidelines, and it's Saison Solera method.
It's tasty. Boy, it's I get a lot of wood character in this one. Mm-hmm. And it's to me it lends. The beer itself is not sweet. It's tart, but to me the wood character is kind of a sweetness.
Right. Kind of those vanilla tones.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A hint of sweetness, right?
Yeah, it's a nice balance. What do you
That's
think?
Interesting.
What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I get the vanilla. The wood is very light. I like this beer quite a lot.
Yeah, that's tasty. There's almost a fruitiness to it too, in a good way. It's very it's lighter bodied than the first one, I would think.
Oh yeah.
But it's with the tartness level. Do you think it's more tart than the first one, or
I don't
it's about
find
the
it
same?
as tart.
I don't think it's as tart. No.
Okay. Mm-mm. Yeah, I would agree with that, and maybe that's letting the sweetness of the barrel flavors come out a little bit. So you took this, since this is a Solera, you took some out of the barrel, and you put some more fresh beer in. Yeah,
and we basically brewed a very similar beer that went in next. So I always love getting feedback because we all have our different perceptions on what we're tasting, and I think in this beer the acidity is right where it should be. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe some of the flavors that we actually are tasting are from the yeast, because this was a beer that we actually did a blend of the French and the Belgian Saison yeast that we fermented a little bit warmer, not as warm as I'm actually fermenting now. Now when I'm using the Belgian Saison yeast, boy, I'm cranking that thing up. Seriously, I'm letting that thing free rise on its own, and then I'm stabilizing it at about 85 degrees, and I keep it at that for 3 weeks. And the amount of esters that are produced, it's just outstanding. And in this beer, we didn't do that, but it was brewed in the summer, and it kind of cranked up to about 80 degrees. So I think some of our flavors are produced because of a bit of a warmer fermentation. I do get a little bit of pencil shaving from this beer, and I'm not sure I like that, to be honest with you. I get the wood, I get the barrel, but it's sort of like the pencil shaving to me, that raw wood, is sort of what this barrel is giving us. And we're at a bit of crossroads with this barrel, because if this beer I think is pretty good, but I think we need to kind of find a way to really play onto that, what the barrel is giving us. So right now we're discussing, do we kind of move towards producing a bit of a darker beer and to kind of play with what the barrel is giving us. The next beer that you'll drink actually came out of the same barrel, and it's going to be interesting to sort of compare.
Interesting.
Yep. And so this beer was basically brewed as a somewhat of a traditional Saison in terms of its grist. It had a little less Pilsner than a traditional. So traditional Saisons are going to have about 85% of their grist is Pilsner, and this only had about 70%, not far off the mark. And then it had some dark Munich in it and some wheat. Okay. And we kind of kept the hops at bay, so I don't think there's any of that metallic or off flavor from the hops. They're not really in the picture.
It is a little darker than the first one, and maybe some of the sweetness that we're getting is from the darker grain coming through as well.
Yeah, that could be.
I wouldn't describe it as pencil shavings. I think it's kind of a fresh oak character, but it's been a while since I've eaten a pencil. I'll have to I'll have to think back in my grade school career when that was an option. Usually mixed with paint, the paint on the pencil.
I chew on drumsticks. I think this is a Vader 7A. This is usually what I get from this.
I believe you just named what this beer is from now on.
Vader 7A.
Vader 7A.
That's it. This is Vader 7A.
Well, it's very delicious.
Mm-hmm.
I like I don't know how to say this in beer judge lingo, but it has a flatter profile than the first beer. The first beer came on a little sweet, then it had this big hump, and then it left you kind of dry. I don't know how to explain that.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I really like that it has a long kind of middle to it, and that doesn't just jump at you.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that.
Well balanced, maybe?
Yeah, maybe that's the technical term I was looking for. but when I think of balance, I think of hops versus malt versus,
right.
and maybe that's still the same thing. But I didn't mean it in the sense that I get a lot of hops or a lot of malt or a balance of either one. There you go.
So, and it's funny that you said about judging, because I actually think that these saisons that are acidic, I just don't know what category they fall in. They don't really fall in any category. And frankly, there's not many on the market. It's sort of the reason why I kind of like producing them. Not only do I like to drink them, but it's not like there's a whole lot of commercial examples of this particular style. And so, in terms of the judging, there's nothing really to compare it to in my mind.
Why don't we rinse again?
Yep.
And we're moving on to beer number 3, which is a Creek that came out of the same barrel. I'm interested to see how this happened.
So a Creek is traditionally, as you guys know, a lambic that is then aged on tart cherry. So we call it a Creek. It's not really a Creek. It's not a traditional Creek. It's our version of a Creek. So, or another way you can say is this is going to be a tart cherry saison, and so it came out of our same barrel with our same methods, and it is actually the next beer. I'm sorry, it's the beer before the saison Solera. So, it is the second sour beer through this process, and we ended up. I'm hoping to demonstrate the effectiveness of a fruit addition, and how the fruit addition can not only add to flavor, but it can actually reduce the perception of the wood and spirit character.
So just to clarify, CJ, this one came before the previous one that we just drank?
Yeah, I think I sort of contradicted myself.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
This one did come before. So you would think that this is going to have more spirit and more wood character. I mean, as a program, as your program evolves over time, you theoretically should have less spirit. You should have less character from the wood over time. And that's typically what happens. And it actually did happen here. But what I'm hoping to demonstrate, I'm hoping, not necessarily will, is what fruit can do, a fruit addition can actually do in terms of that perception. So this baby aged in the barrel, in the 15-gallon barrel, for actually 11 months. One question that I get often, and it's really hard to answer, is, how long do you age them in barrels? And so what I've always been saying is, think of it in terms of months, not years. But as a home brewer, we want more specific and direct answers. Hey, listen, I have a 10-gallon barrel. How long do I age it? Well, you got to let flavor dictate, but as a general guideline and rule of thumb that I follow is for every gallon your barrel is, think of it as about a month of aging that you're going to deal with. So my 3-gallon, my little guy, I'm not aging that for a year. I'm actually thinking that in terms of about 3 months. If it goes a month or two more, I mean, that's okay. I'm going to sample it, but just as a general guideline. So this thing stayed in the barrel for 11 months. After the barrel, that's when we always do fruit additions, is post-barrel aging. We don't age fruit in our barrels. And so what we did is we added a tart cherry concentrate to this beer. And about 3 months later, it was still fermenting, but it was such a sluggish fermentation, secondary fermentation, that we were a little like, okay, this thing should be ready to go at this point. And kind of what we have found with using concentrate is that it can be a bit of a sluggish secondary fermentation. So my recommendation is add some fresh Brett or fresh bugs. I actually prefer Brett in this process. So add some fresh Brett when you use a concentrate, just to jumpstart your secondary fermentation. So after 3 months of being like, can we drink this beer yet? That's what we did. We added some fresh Brett to it, and then 3 months later, we were bottling it, and it was ready to drink. Again, this is not a traditional style for a creek or a fruit lambic, but it is kind of ours. And it actually recently took first place in the 2015 Southern New England Regional Homebrew Competition for the sour beer category.
Wow. Well, it is tart.
Yeah.
The cherries and then the tartness from the bugs. Mm-hmm. It's a pucker one. It'll make you pucker, but you can still taste the fruit and you can taste the wood character as well.
Yeah, I still get the wood, and I think it has a little more body and more mouthfeel, something kind of.
Definitely.
I like this beer a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I get some tobacco as well.
Ooh.
Well, I was actually smoking a cigar when we made this.
That's it.
It was the ashtray.
I'm either describing a men's cologne or a beer. I'm not sure.
Tobacco,
burnt leather.
He came in third at the Preakness with burnt leather.
Burnt leather.
I'm guessing that doesn't smell good.
Burnt leather. It is really good, though.
Yeah,
it is
it's very tasty.
Yeah, it's more of a mouthful than the previous one, which I would assume, not knowing any better, that if you put like a fruit concentrate, it might dry it out a little bit, but it's not. It's a full-bodied beer and very tasty and very satisfying.
I think you guys have totally hit the nail on the head with this beer and your observations. It's funny, we actually added oats to this beer. And when you add rolled oats to a beer, as you know, it's going to give you a little bit more body. It's actually something that we even do when we're making our we're kind of calling them farmhouse hoppy pale ales kind of thing. And if you're into this style of heavy hops, low alcohol, a lot of late addition, sometimes the beers can kind of thin out. And so we started sneaking a little oats in there just to give it a little more body, not only playing with mash temperatures, but adding oats as well. And looking back at my records, we actually did add some oats to this. It's less than 5%. It's around 3%, 3.5%. But it seems to be enough to give you a little mouthfeel. And I also think you're right, James. The concentrate, theoretically, you would think that it would totally ferment out. And what we find is it doesn't. It does leave a little residual sugar there.
Well,
and I think
you do get a good cherry character. Mm-hmm. I think I said maybe the good cherry character. There's a good bit of wood in there to balance it out. Now, was this the rum barrel again, or was this a whiskey barrel?
No, so this is that 15-gallon whiskey barrel.
Okay. But I'm not getting a lot of whiskey character. Are you guys getting any whiskey?
That's what I find to be so interesting, and it really shows you what fruit can do. Now, remember, this came before the last Saison that we were talking about, how much wood character was actually present. It was a nice wood character, but you guys were describing vanilla. That's coming from the spirit, the wood. Mm-hmm. And now with this fruit addition, it so interplays so well that you don't really get that.
Interesting. I wonder if
it is.
I wonder if the extra work that the yeast did after the beer was taken out of the barrel, I wonder if that impacted the wood character some. I wonder if it worked on the compounds or whatever, the woodiness of the beer.
What I find is the woodiness of the beer over time will dissipate slightly, but I also find that the perception of the spirit You would think that if it's in a whiskey barrel and it comes out of a whiskey barrel and I try it when I bottle it or whenever in the process, this is the amount of whiskey, this is the amount of spirit that's going to be present. And what happens is over time it actually does. I'm not sure if it's degrading, but the perception of it does decrease over time. And if the 11 months in the barrel and then 6 months out of the barrel, then we bottled it. I don't have the cap in front of me. But it's been quite a ways since we bottled it. It has had some time to kind of mellow a bit in terms of those flavors. The one thing about this beer that I think there can be some improvement is I do find I love the concentrates. They're easy to work with. They're cost effective, but I do find that the color is a little lackluster as compared to a vibrant color that you get with fresh fruit. So what I would consider doing with this beer, and again, this is another collaboration that I did with my brother, and I'm going to steal his idea and call it my own, is to do a combination of the concentrate with some fresh fruit. And really what we're looking for in the fresh fruit is that vibrant color. So I think this is a very good beer. We're getting close, but there can be some fine tuning to it.
Yeah, there's not a pinkish hue as you as you might expect.
This reminds me a lot of the show where we were talking about the meads, and he was using juices versus whole fruit. And we all agreed that the whole fruit, of course, the skins add a lot of color and adds tannins and stuff that help balance as well. But that was my takeaway from that show, was that getting it on the fruit gives you a more round and a more full fruit flavor.
That's interesting. In terms of juice, I mean, believe it or not, I've actually tried to add juice before. It was somewhat successful. The problem with juice is there's so much water, and that you dilute your beer slightly. It did work, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But if you're looking to add fruit to your beers, and again, this is a demonstration of its effectiveness, especially when you're making these sour beers that are barrel aged. I would recommend stone fruits. Start with stone fruits, start with concentrates. Stone fruits such as, I love pluots. Pluots are a cross between an apricot and a plum, certainly plums. Peaches, I really like peaches. Other people struggle with peaches. I find the big thing with peaches is you just have to use a ton of peaches. And certainly do kind of a combination of things. What I try to do is I like to consider myself a value player, which is another way of saying I'm slightly cheap, is I want to buy fruit that is local, in season, on sale. I'm going to get that fruit as super ripe as possible, to the point where you're not even comfortable really eating it around other people, kind of thing. And I'm going to quarter that fruit. I'm going to keep the seed. I vacuum seal them up. I have a chest freezer. I stick them in. And then when I find the appropriate time to use that, I'll stick that fresh, frozen, quartered fruit into the beer.
Your experience, Steve, with pureed peaches. Didn't you do pureed peaches in a beer one time?
I did it in a mead.
Oh,
and it didn't work out so well, because you can never get rid of those pureed peaches.
It's a gloppy thing.
Yeah, well, it wasn't gloppy. It was more like a fine filigree of peach that was always in there, no matter what you did.
Like peach nectar.
Kind of, yeah.
It just never settles out. I've done the same thing.
No,
it
you
kind
can't do
of
it.
It gets partially settled, but there's a little light area on top, but most of it's still just kind of mud.
I even tried to hit it with some gelatin.
Oh.
And all I ended up with was really ugly mead then.
Well, I've tried clarifying beer and mead with gelatin, but I'd rather have cloudy beer or mead rather than to lose what I lost in the bottom of the fermenter. With what I got from because it settles out and it clears out the beer, but then you got this sludge at the bottom that you don't get to drink.
Yep.
I'd rather drink ugly mead or beer that tastes good.
I'd rather drink ugly.
I drink ugly.
I drink ugly. Speaking of which, back to the Flemish Red.
Now,
this is beautiful.
It's a beautiful beer. It's good and clear and darker.
It's like a Flemish Red Skeleton.
You're going to say it looks like La Folie?
It does look like La Folie. I wasn't going to say that. But
I've been making this beer more towards my taste and my friend's taste and what we're looking for in a Flemish Red than what actually the guidelines for a Flemish Red really, truly are. So there's some challenges with Flemish Red. A lot of commercial examples, or most commercial examples, are pasteurized. And the reason why they pasteurize is they're locking in the sweetness. And because this is a style that there is an expectation that the beer is actually sweet, along with its very complex sourness and acidity. And so for a homebrew, it's very, very challenging. The grist is mostly Pilsner, about 50% Pilsner. I typically add about a third of dark Munich, and then the rest of it are your Kerrers and your crystal malts. I'm sort of leaning to this idea that you got to add more of your unfermentables. You got to find a way to get this beer a little bit sweeter. So in terms of fermentation, there's a couple different approaches that you can take. You can take a mixed fermentation, so the Roselair. I know I'm sort of mispronouncing it. This is the American version of pronouncing it. So you can take, we'll call it, say, mixed fermentation. The Weiss Roselair to me is the right set of bugs to add it's not just bugs, it's also Saccharomyces, but the right cocktail to add for this particular style. So you can do it mixed fermentation in the primary and then age it after. You can certainly age it in a carboy. I personally think this style works extremely well in a barrel, specifically a whiskey or a bourbon barrel. Or you could take the approach of a clean fermentation. And there's some benefits to that, especially if you're not if you don't have other gear to use for your sour beer, exclusive gear. And I would suggest doing an English ale yeast as your primary fermentation. And then after primary, when you rack it or you put it into your barrel, add your mixed. My brother actually uses that method, and I have been using the mixed fermentation method in primary. It appears as though, for the most part, our end product had been pretty similar. But as of late, his beers have tended to evolve to have a little bit more sweetness than mine. And I'm kind of leaning towards that as a best practice for home brewers, especially when you're dealing with these small barrels and the vigor of this Roselair yeast, which I think I said on episode 1, it could basically ferment water. The thing will go through anything. So, if you give it a tremendous amount of available sugars, it's going to produce a very, very acidic and dry beer. And I sort of think that's what you guys are going to taste in this beer. I do think that this beer before I even get into the tasting of it, I'll just give you a little background on the beer. So it is a blend. So it's 80% out of that, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, the Woodinville. I do have one of those Woodinville barrels. It's an 8-gallon barrel, and 80% came out of that barrel. And so Flemish Red with primary fermentation with the mixed fermentation. And then there was 20% of the beer that I exclusively fermented with Brettanomyces. It was actually Brett Lambicus that I fermented. And it took a long time for that beer to kind of finish out. And what I would recommend is, again, use an English ale yeast and then hit it with Brett at the end. I just took way too long to be ready for me to be able to blend it. And what ended up happening was it kind of stalled my ability to bottle. So this beer sat in, the 80% sat in the oak barrel for almost a year, which is a little longer than I think it needed. I'm not sure it did anything too negative to the beer, but it just was unnecessary. I think a better description for this beer, as you guys are trying it, is really a barrel-aged dark sour. I think that just those words, that description, really plays better into what this beer is versus a Flemish Red. If you think about a Flemish Red, a Rodenbach, this is not Rodenbach. Maybe closer to La Folie. When you guys started saying La Folie, to me, show's over. Let's just call it La Folie, and that's it. I'm ready to go home.
Yeah, it's pretty similar.
I think it's good. I think you get the wood character. It's tart, but I get a sweetness that I don't necessarily get with La Folie. I think it is a little sweeter than La Folie, but I think that makes it more approachable than La Folie. I think that most people, if they've never had a sour beer before, when they drink La Folie, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so sour. It smells like sauerkraut and it's so sour. This one is a bit more approachable and kind of more balanced, in my opinion, because I get a kind of a sweetness along with the tartness that I find, appealing. I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're just different beers. What do you guys think? Are my taste buds, is my sourness receptors, are they just being blown out, by all the sour that we've had this evening? Or
I was going to say you're completely whacked, James. No, this is a very tasty beer. I'll agree. It's not a Rodenbach, but it is very similar to the Lafayette. Lafayette, I think, has the benefit of being able to do a lot of blending from different woods and even probably different years to really be able to tweak the complexity of that beer. Whereas this is, only it's got 2 blends, right? So this is, and one of them is the predominant part of it, right? So about 80% from the barrel. So yeah, this is a delicious beer. I like it a lot.
Yeah,
I'm glad.
I think, and Lafayette has gotten a little bit more, at least the last time we tasted it, I think it was a little less sour, maybe a little more sweet, kind of. It seems like they're toning it down a little bit, and maybe I'm just getting used to it. What do you think, Steve?
Well, in terms of the Lafayette, the thing that I noticed the biggest change in it is that it doesn't seem to have as much malt backbone as it used to have for me. I remember it being very bread-like, and I don't get that anymore. And so this is not bread-like either, in my opinion. So, and that's, so just in general, it reminds me of it a lot. But this is a really good beer. I'd be honored to have brewed it. So, no complaints from this side of the peanut gallery. It's a good beer, and go great with all kinds of food. That's the thing that I like too, is being able to pair all these different beers with good food, because I think they go together. I do have a quick question for you, CJ, and that is, I've bought some beers, some commercial beers, and I've made some beers that I thought needed to age, and then when I drank them, they didn't. Particularly sour beers that I've bought just off the shelf, and a couple of creeks and things, and thought they were just awful, and I thought it was because they were old. So what I want to ask you is, about how long, in your opinion, should a beer, any of these sour beers, stay in the bottle before you drink them? Should they be drunk young? Should they be, cellared or, for a while? What are your thoughts?
It really depends, and I know that's not the answer that you're looking for, but it does depend. If it's pasteurized, obviously, like Lafayette, don't age it.
Right.
They've locked in the flavor.
But your beer, homebrews.
So homebrew sour beers, it's really going to depend on the bugs. It's going to depend on a number of factors. To be perfectly honest with you, what I do is age is your friend. The longer, typically, the better, to some degree, because there are some bugs that will continue to acidify the beer, and when you're drinking one of your homebrew sour beers and you think that this thing is really good, I'm going to say it's peaked. That's when you really want to put it on the chopping block, so to speak, and start drinking.
Okay.
But you got to kind of see. My viewpoint is that each barrel is its program. And so within the programs, if you were to say, okay, your Flemish Reds, when do they peak? Well, our Flemish Reds, after about a year in the bottle, they pretty much stabilize, and they sort of lock in where they're at. It doesn't get a whole lot more acidic after that. My Saisons, I like to age my Saisons. But the problem with aging the Saisons is you do get higher acidity, and it will create an imbalance in it. So what I try to do is I try to bottle into different size bottles, so I'm constantly sampling the beers. And when I'm feeling like, okay, this beer is prime, it's in prime condition, it's peaking, I want to be drinking it. If something's off on it, and I'm not saying an off flavor, I'm just saying there's a little bit of confusion there. It's continuously developing within the bottle. That's when you're really opening those small bottles and kind of letting it be, so to speak.
We're experiencing a second round of thunderstorms here in Northwest Arkansas. It's a typical springtime. It's not spring. So to wrap up, CJ, What are you seeing for the next steps for your program?
So each barrel, there's going to be a different set of next steps. I'll start kind of in reverse where we just ended, and this Flemish red. I do want to create a little more acidity. When I had talked to you before, James, I said we're very critical of our sour beers, and I'm hoping that that's come through today, that I'm not just saying, I sent you 4 beers, they're all awesome, there's nothing wrong with them. There's changes that will be made and trying to hone in and improve. So the Flemish Red, what I'm going to try to do is I'm just trying to get a little bit more sweetness. This is brewed toward how I used to really enjoy this beer and how my friends enjoy it, but I do think it's a little bit too dry. So there's some steps that I'm going to take to get some more unfermentables in there. One thing that my brother had done that I'm kind of resisting, he did it in terms of entering into a contest, is he did that a Flemish Red that it was primary fermentation occurred with Saccharomyces English ale yeast, aged in a bourbon barrel, and then he blended up the acidity, and he force carbonated it, then bottled it. And he won Best of Show in a small local homebrew competition versus about 100 beers, which is, that's prestigious enough. But just that's not something that we like to do. We like to naturally carbonate our beers and really sit on them and let flavors develop over time. But that's one thing that I'd like to do with this style. In terms of the Solera, that we're kind of back to the drawing board on this particular system. Not that we're scrapping the whole concept and methodology, but we really want to look at playing towards what the barrel is offering. So I think we're going to look to increase the dark malts and see if that will play a little bit better with what the barrel is offering. I certainly think that the tart cherry concentrate worked well, and so we'll probably stick with using fruit for some time. In terms of the blended Saison and the tart farmhouse, rather, that rum barrel, I definitely am trying to increase the yeast-driven flavors. I'm using much more Belgian Saison yeast than I ever have. I'm building up. What happens with the Belgian Saison is people try it, and you get the notorious stuck fermentation. So what happens is, it drops down to about 1.03, 1.04. Everything's going great, and all of a sudden it shuts down. And so people will try that and be like, oh, no, this yeast is no good. I can't use it. It's a little finicky. What I have found is if you build up starters on it, so don't just do one starter, do a starter, decant it, do another starter, decant it, really build up your culture. And when you're building up that starter, do it warm. So if I'm fermenting at 85, my starter's at 85. And when that baby is, boy, I'm sick of making starters. This thing is ready to just jump out of the Erlenmeyer and ferment anything. That's when I'm going to add it. And I'm going to add to a wort that's around, low 70s, let it free rise up, and then crank it to 85 for 3 weeks. And the Belgian Saison yeast, when you can ferment that thing, when it ferments out, it produces beautiful esters. And so I'm trying to introduce that more in the barrel program, get a little closer to that barn as I spoke to before. And that's really essentially where my programs are right now with the beers, with the barrels that we talked about today. But again, every barrel is its own program. So my 3-gallon barrel, I have a wine barrel that my cousins put wine in. They're winemakers, so we gave them a nice bourbon barrel. When they transferred it out, they said, "Oh my God, this wine tastes like bourbon." And we said, "Don't worry, guys. You're gonna be happy when we're giving you beer that has come out of this barrel." I also have a fresh barrel next to me that I purchased at Maltos Express. That is a used wine barrel, 7.5 gallon, that it has a fresh char on it. And that I'm going to actually give to my cousin as well, let him throw some wine in there a little bit, and then that will become its own program. So every barrel is its program. They're all like my little children.
Well, we appreciate your sharing your children with us, CJ, and this has been delicious. It's been a while since I've had a good tasting of sour beers.
Yeah.
And so thank you very, very much for sending them along. And Andy and Steve, it's good to get together in the same room.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Thanks, CJ. Keep us posted.
Steve, Andy, James, thanks so much for having me. I hope you guys make a great night out of it.
We will.
We've got a good start. Thanks, CJ.
Have a good one.
Thanks again to CJ for the awesome beers and the great advice. And thanks always to Steve Wilkes and to Andy Sparks of thehomebrewery.com for making it out to the house. We had a great time. And there are worse things to do, you know? Speaking of worse things, don't forget to send in your brewing disaster stories for this year's disaster show. Sooner is better than later. In the meantime, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form at basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All-Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You can get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo. And we have reduced pricing on all of our DVDs for the holiday season. You can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs at basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Das Gourmet Salt Sampler and Miracle Grow for Christmas trees. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping for the holiday season. We greatly appreciate your support. And don't forget you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associated links on basicbrewing.com. And you can also do the just the electronic version of BYO as well. I always forget about that. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.